we can start the session. We all can settle on our chosen seats, eyes closed, spine erect. Let's chant Om 3 times and the Sahanavavatu prayer. Om Sahanavavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Gently open your eyes. Okay. So, namaste again, everyone, and welcome to the second session of Yogaarthi. So, we started this activity last month where we had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Sriram Agashe. And today we have invited Umakant Nadkar. So I'll just put him on spotlight so you all can meet him. So he's Umakant Nadkar, and yes, I think not able to. Yes, I think you can unmute yourself. Just try once.
Yes.
No, we're not able to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Or is it just me? Okay, okay, now we can hear you. I mean, now we will be able to hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Okay. So, Umakant Nadkar, I'll just have an introduction about him for you all. So, by profession, he is into management. He's a management professional. But he has been active in social and development sector for about more than 15 years now. And he has contributed in several social causes like health, education, and livelihood for about a decade now. And he's active as a trustee for an NGO called Shubhalahari Pratishthan, and he is also the founder of Veda, which is Vedic Education and Development Association. So he calls himself a student of meditation, and we all know him as a teacher of meditation for more than 50 years. And he also has keen interest in the Vedas and Upanishads. And he has been delivering lectures and has been conducting sessions on the essence of the Upanishads for a lot of students. So his interest and passion is to study and spread the knowledge of the Vedas and Upanishads and conduct profound research on Vedic culture and Vedic civilization. So thank you very much for accepting our invite and coming here, Umakant sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
So his topic for today is the revival of Vedic cultural civilization, a scientific approach. So we all are eager to hear you. So now over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, thanks for inviting me for this session. I have been knowing Sushma ji also for quite some time, and through her, actually, I got in connection with you as well. So for uh, quite some time, few years back, actually, I was trying to understand few roots and origin of a lot of things, and this is where exactly I got into the idea of Vedas. So I'll just share a screen. Okay, I think you've already made me the host. Okay. So this was few years before. Like I have been teaching meditations. I still am a student of meditation, and this happens through a Guru Shishya Parampara. My Guru is Shri Paramod Kulkarni sir. Probably you, a few of you might be knowing him already. And I was associated with him since my college days. And a lot of activities were happening around meditation. So even Reiki forms of different forms of meditations I was looking into. But as in when my journey in meditation was going ahead, uh, quite a lot of years back, this was continuously churning in my mind. Exactly when I speak about meditation, I am also a student of yoga. Especially, I'm learning Swara Yoga, and my teacher, my guru, Shri Pramod Kulkarni sir, he is a Swara Yogi himself, and I'm teaching at his feet, at his lotus feet. So, what exactly is the origin? For example, when I see myself, I see myself as an Indian, and I think Hindi and English would be comfortable for the team, right? Great, great. Okay. So when I was seeing myself as a student and even as a teacher of meditation, and more importantly, when I was looking at this scenario, that especially when we are born in this great country called as Bharat, what is it that really makes us unique? Because when I was contemplating about this, I also had this conversation with quite a lot of friends of mine. And when I realized that, what if I had born out of this country? The kind of knowledge, the kind of essence which I really received would have been exactly the same which I have got as born as an Indian, as a Bharatiya. So the answer was a clear no. I do understand that yoga has today reached millions and millions of people all around the world. But at the same time, the kind of essence that a person is able to grasp or a person is able to catch, it is absolutely different, especially when the context is entirely different. And when you are born and you are here learning as an Indian, as a Bharatiya, and getting it exactly in a Guru Shishya Parampara or through the roots of our own very own country. So this is exactly where my research of the origin of who exactly I am. So when I say who exactly I am, I'm not talking about the origin of who I am in terms of soul, but I'm talking about who I am as a Bharatiya. It came into picture. So even when we say we are Yogaarthi, so the team, the group that is joining here, that has joined here, we call ourselves as Yogaarthi, right? So Yogaarthi, when we say, it is like we are here to learn yoga. We are here to learn the deepest aspects of yoga. And the final aim or final objective, whatever we are trying to do in our lives, we are trying to learn through yoga, we are trying to do it through different forms of meditation. Finally, what we are trying to do is we are trying to reach to that state of emancipation or something called as moksha. One thing we all are really aware about, that it is only and only this country, it is only and only India where the idea of moksha comes. Any other form of religion in any part of the country, you will never hear anything which is equivalent to moksha. Of course, there is no word which is moksha elsewhere because it has its own Sanskrit origin. But at the same time, you also don't hear an idea that the nearest word that you hear about is salvation or emancipation. Even you hear this term as salvation or emancipation, it is not equivalent to moksha or mukti anywhere. So this is exactly where the uniqueness of the culture of this country lies. Now, when I think about this, little going back, probably all of us who are sitting here, who are trying to understand what exactly this subject is about, what exactly this topic is about, we might contemplate going a little back in our history, going a little back in our past as a student past. There was some time in our lives where we felt that yes, I need to learn yoga. Yes, I need to learn a form of some or the other method or technique wherein either I get some kind of mental relief or release of stress, and most importantly, I think 70 to 80 more than that percent of people actually get into these practices because they want to attain something which we have been continuously hearing about, which is moksha or mukti. And this is a term which is absolutely unique to this country. And when we say absolutely unique to this country, what I'm saying is this is a term or this is a concept or an idea which is absolutely unique to the culture of this country. Because when I see myself, when few years back, and I think everyone would probably relate to this, uh, how did I get that desire of learning yoga? This was because this was absolutely and totally imbibed into the culture of this country. And this is where the culture gets its significance because the ultimate idea of yoga or any other form of meditation or any other form of upasana that we might be doing in our day-to-day practices, any other form of sadhana that you might be doing in your day-to-day practices with the ultimate objective of attaining the highest form of the supreme or attaining the moksha or mukti, which is the highest objective of any life, which we say in this country. This the root of this very idea lies in the culture of this country. Now, when we say I am a Bharatiya, मैं एक भारतीय हूँ, तो इसका मीनिंग क्या होता है? So this is exactly where I started thinking, contemplating more about ki, who am I? What is the origin of this country? And I got into a lot of research because I had been practicing meditation for quite a lot of time. I still today teach and I'm a student of meditation. So this is where the idea of research and the idea of meditation, they got together somewhere. So I would like to share few aspects of what details I actually got into slowly and steadily. But before we actually get into this, I have a very simple question to the audience that is here. Uh, you can, I think you can put it in your chat. You can put it as a message here. I want to understand when we speak about our civilization, Bharatiya civilization, or when we speak about Bharatiya culture, do you think as a perception, do you think it is a yogic culture or it is a Vedic culture? Can you just put this in the chat? What do you feel? Is it a Vedic culture or is it a yogic culture? Okay. 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 I think we already have a lot of answers out here. Most part we are saying that we are a Vedic culture. There are a lot of people who are saying that we are yogic culture, and also there is fairly equal number of people out here who are saying that yes, we are both. We are Vedic as well as we are yogic. So I think there is certainly a perception that when we speak about the origin of Indian culture, we think, probably we know, it might be a fact, it might not be a fact. We'll slowly see a lot of things as we move ahead in this session, in this talk. But right now, what I understand is we have this idea that there is something called as Vedic culture, and there is also something called as Yogic culture, which are probably a lot or slightly different to each other. So if we look into the roots of exactly what this country, which is Bharat, really is, there is no starting point scientifically that we can ever find out. And this is a very important idea. We have to understand this very clearly. The most evident fact as where exactly we as a cultural unit started, we as Bharat started, is a time around 7,000 to 7,500 years before, where our origin of civilization currently is considered unanimously by the scientific community together as the point, which is the Harappan Valley civilization. Are you able to see this second slide, or are we still at the first slide itself?
We're at the first slide.
Yeah, just do that. Sorry, there is a lag. Yes. So this is the most important fact that we have to understand here. Scientifically, because there is a lot of difference in the kind of literature that we inherently as Indians have, and whatever globally has been said about. Unfortunately, a lot of scientific evidences, which are not even real evidences, have been spoken about for quite some time, more than 200 years. Especially this started when the British were ruling this country. And so compiling and mixing all these evidences and the facts that are present all around. So there are several lot of research articles that are already available. And whatever I'm talking about, this is everything based upon facts. So the earliest origin of this country, the cultural aspect we'll talk about a little later. But even if we talk about the origins of this country as Bharat, as a cultural unit, is said to be, honestly, I don't believe it, because there are facts and there are evidences which is much before that. But according to scientific evidences and globally accepted scientific evidences, it is at least 7,500 years old. Now, we might probably think that this is little conflicting to what we have been hearing and listening or understanding from our forefathers, my mother, my grandmother, because they have been always saying that nahi, hamara Bharat to hai wo hazaron salon se, probably more than 60,000 years, this country has been existing. So let us look into all different aspects of exactly what is there as a fact really existing and what is something that we need to accept. So this
can I just interrupt? Sorry.
Yes, yes.
Is it possible to put the slideshow on?
It's not in slideshow mode?
No, it is not. So it will be better visible.
I think there is a lag. I think because of some internet issue, there is some lag. I can see it in full scale at my end. Is it okay if I share you this presentation and you can just share it on your screen?
Yeah, this can be done, but I think we should be fine. This is also okay, right? What do you say, everyone? We can continue, no? This is fine.
If this is not visible, then...
No,
okay.
slideshow would have been better, but I think this is also fine. We can continue.
Sure. Okay. So this is the place where the origin of India is considered to be as the starting point of the time or the chronological beginning of this country is the Harappan Valley civilization. Unfortunately speaking, the Harappan Valley civilization is something that has gone, much part of the Harappan Valley civilization has gone into a place called as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, which is not a part of this country anymore. It belongs to a place called Pakistan. But certainly 7,000, at least 7,000 years back, there was a time, and much, much more time back, there was a complete civilization, which was Harappan Valley civilization, where we think that the beginning of the civilization, which we call as the Aryan civilization or the Indian civilization, came into place. Now, there is a lot of discussion that is happening about around the origin of this country. I would like to place different kind of schools that have been speaking different types of topics. For example, now there is a school of thought which says that हम शुरुआत से ये सुनते आ रहे हैं, especially since our childhood, we have been learning Mahabharata and Ramayana. Now, if we say Ram, who belongs to Raghukul, or we say Krishna, this entire clan or this entire community, our ancient community, is said to be belonging to a community called as, or a race called as the Aryan community. And we have always been calling ourselves as the Aryan race itself. Now, there is a school of thought which originated somewhere around 200 years back. Now, this school of thought says that whatever we call as we are, as a race, as an Indian race or a Bharatiya race, which primarily is a Aryan race, this entire community originated not in the land of this country itself, but this originated somewhere called as the Steppies of Eurasia. Now, when I say Steppies of Eurasia, if you see this place, I don't know if my cursor, there is a green space that is available there, that is showing there. This is called as the Steppe of Eurasia. Now, the Steppe of Eurasia is a place which is to the south of the current Russia and a little to the east side of the Asia, the Asian continent. The west side of the Asian continent and the east side of the European continent. It has been said that there was a huge clan called as the nomadic clan, which originated in the pastorals. Now, there is a pastoral called as Yamnaya pastoral, which is to the south of Russia, a clan called as Nordic clan, which originated here. And there was an influx of this clan later in some time. There was an influx of this clan, which moved more towards the eastern side of the pastoral. Now, the green color that we are seeing, if we move slightly towards the eastern side, this is how it is said that the migration of this clan actually happened. Now, this clan later on got divided into two different lines. One moved a little towards the north, the northern side, which later on developed the community or the population of China and Mongolia. And there was a clan which moved a little towards the southern side and more towards the Iran. Now, the clan which moved towards the Iran, it is said that in some time in the history of this world, there was a time when partially a fraction of this clan broke up and they moved more towards the eastern aspect of Iran. And this is where this portion of the population headed towards what we call as the Harappan Valley civilization area or the current Mohenjo-daro area. And this is where the civilization or the Indian civilization was formed or brought into picture. So this is one of the aspects. Now, there are several different kinds of evidences which scientists, probably the Indologists or the archaeologists, brought into picture. One of the most important factors that we have to consider here when we think about this kind of a theory, this is called as the Aryan invasion or the Aryan migration theory. Probably a lot of us might be already aware of the Aryan invasion theory, or we might have heard of this Aryan invasion theory. So what the Aryan invasion theory says that there was an aboriginal community population existing in India, which was called as the Dravidian population. So this was much previous population than what the Aryan population is. As in slowly and steadily, as we move ahead of the session, we'll exactly understand why I'm exactly talking about this and how does it connect to the cultural origin of this country. Now, this was exactly the school which was highly politically motivated because they belonged to the British community. The scientists, like people like Professor Max Muller, etc., they belong to the scientific community. And they had this political agenda in their mind, and they wanted to prove that the Aboriginal Indians are not as a single cultural unity. Rather, they are a mixture of unity, which was actually invaded by some outer population. I'll come into these evidences because there are certainly very recent evidences which exactly speak opposite to it. But let us understand this first school of thought. What is the basis of this exactly? So there are three bases that the scientists speak about. The first base is language. Now, when I speak about language, especially this is a truth about Professor Max Muller. He was studying Sanskrit language. He actually came to India. Rather, there is a legend which goes that Professor Max Muller was a kind of a person. He was a professor who wrote so much about Sanskrit. He wrote so much about the culture of India without even traveling to this country. He did not even take efforts to travel to this country. Rather, there were certain people whom he was paying, which belonged to this land itself, who were studying on his behalf. And when they were studying, they were actually distorting the history of this culture altogether. When this entire process was happening, Professor Max Muller, he was an Indologist and he was also an expert in language. And when he was studying this, there is something called as Indo-European language. When he heard Sanskrit, when he started listening and learning about Sanskrit, he realized that there is a lot of similarity which is existing between the, the sound of Sanskrit, the script of Sanskrit, and many other languages which are European languages. The distance was miles apart. Geographically, spatially, the distance was miles apart. But there were so many countries and so many people all around the globe who were speaking a language which is very similar to Sanskrit. This is exactly where he decided that he will study how Sanskrit is related to any other language. This is where the Indo-European clan or the Indo-European group of languages come into picture. And the theory that people like Max Muller alike, they brought into light was this. There was a time in history of mankind that a population from the Nordic region, the south of the Steppies, which moved to the Iran area, they spoke a language which is called as Avesta. Now, Avesta is the inherent language of Zoroastrian literature. And certainly there is a lot of similarity between Avesta, the culture of Avesta, and the language of Sanskrit, as well as the culture of Vedic Sanskrit. There are a lot of similarities that usually happen, especially when I specifically speak about the ritual of fire. The Vedic culture, if I talk about, the Vedic culture cannot exist without the ritual of fire, the yajna. Similarly, the same was the situation with the Zoroastrian culture. The culture could not exist without the idea of fire or the god of fire, Agni, जो हम जिसको वेदा में अग्नि मानते हैं, उसी की प्रार्थना, उसी का वर्शिप जो है वो अवेस्ता में ईरान में किया जाता था. Now there is a lot of contradiction out here as well. Slowly and steadily we'll look into all the scientific aspects of exactly what is reality and what is spoken about. Now what scientists 200 years before they started propagating was this. A certain proportion like Sanskrit and Veda, it originated in the place of Iran. Okay, now this is something which is absolutely ridiculous. I'll also give the evidence why. Now the language Sanskrit and the Vedas originated somewhere near Iran, and the people who migrated towards the southeast region and then entered into the plains of the Ganges or the plains of the Sapta Sindhu, the Indus Valley, and they developed this the entire culture of Vedas there. So scientists here say that the origin of the Veda, which is the first ever Veda, which is the Rigveda, the origin of Ved is not on the Indian land itself. The origin of Ved is found to be on the land of Iran. And this is where we get our origin. And so because there is nothing original about the country, how this was politically used was, number one, it was used to break the land of this country between two different races. One is the Dravidian race and the Aryan race. So an idea of Dravidian versus Aryan was created. This was first part of it. The second was, number two, Sanskrit did not origin in this country. So whatever pride that we have based on our language and based on our culture, it was totally, the idea was to break it because Sanskrit did not originate here. And thirdly, which we always consider as ourselves as a unique unit piece of the Aryan civilization, which is a mix of Aryan and Dravidian genes and civilizations. It does not belong that. Rather, the Aryans invaded the Dravidians, the Aboriginal Indians, and so the Indian Dravidians were actually slaves of the Aryans. And this is where the Aryan invasion theory came into picture. This is where they said that actually Aryans invaded us. You were never the Aryans before this. So this is the origin of this school of thought, which we have been continuously thinking about, studying about. Even all our school history, school textbooks have been teaching us about the Aryan invasion theory, which now slowly and steadily is has already moved to from Aryan invasion theory, it has moved to Aryan migration theory, and even the Aryan migration theory is now starting to be proved as false. The very first time, because see, this idea was never challenged before. Unfortunately, because of certain reasons, because of certain interests that were vested in this very idea, this idea was never challenged for at least 200 years. Just a few years back, now this is again a scientific evidence that I'm talking about. Before I get into this scientific evidence, this is the Indo-European language linguistic theory that as an evidence was shown to prove the Aryan invasion theory. There was a second more important factor which was placed here, which was the archaeological factor. Now, according to archaeology, unfortunately, there are very recent archaeological excavations that have happened in this country. When this invasion theory was put forward, there were very less archaeological evidences which were already available for us. The Mohenjo-daro and the Harappan civilization, these excavations were not available. And the entire aspect of this theory was built upon the linguistic aspect of this theory. Now, the third evidence that we speak about, which usually Indologists or any other people who are studying cultures of any part of the country or any part of the world, what they take into consideration is the literature, the oldest literature that ever exists. Now, whatever literature that we have were divided into the Vedas and the Puranas. Now, when I'm saying this Vedas and Puranas, we'll get to this. What are Vedas? What are Puranas, etc. A lot of interesting facts have to be discussed today. But I'm talking this with relevance only to the historical and the cultural aspect of this country. Very conveniently, the historians and the Indologists, they removed the evidences from the Puranas which are existing, and they started calling the Puranas as myths, because within the Purana we have our Mahabharata, within the Purana we have our Ramayana, and they started calling this as myth. We'll get there why exactly these were called as myth. And the only real written literature evidence which was considered was the Vedas, the four Vedas, and most anciently as the Rigveda. Unfortunately, we see that when we study Veda, now this is the biggest challenge we as Indians have actually faced. Now, when we start studying as Vedas, the four Vedas, the Rigveda, the Samveda, Atharvaveda, and Yajurveda, there is no historical literature that is available there. Now, probably we might be thinking, I don't know if you have already studied these Vedas, you have gone through these Vedas, how exactly they look like, what exactly Vedas are. We'll see each and every aspect of this Veda, and how does the entire culture of this country originate out of this Vedas. We'll also get to this. But before this, the most difficult aspect of studying a Veda is that the moment for the first time as a beginner, if you pull a book of Veda, say for example, you pull a book of Rigveda, even if you are a Sanskrit scholar, if you pull out Rigveda and it is the first day of your study of Veda, you will start realizing that if there is no context given to the Veda, it is absolutely obscure. And that is the reason why if you study historical books, it is not obscure. I'll tell you why. Because I'll break down each and every Veda into a logical aspect. Now, if you study all the historical books that have been written about the culture and the history of this country before, they have specifically used, everywhere they have used this word as obscure. The culture is obscure. The origin of Vedas is obscure. The meaning of Vedas is obscure. The reason is because those people who wrote the history of this country had no relation to the context of this country. No, we are still in this second slide itself. I'll move to the next slide. We are still on the Aryan civilization part of it. Now, this is exactly where just a few years back, when the Harappan Valley civilization excavations came up, we first ever realized that Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and alike civilizations are not only the oldest civilizations that exist. We always inherently knew that India is one of the oldest civilizations that exist. Culturally, as a unit, we are the oldest civilization that exists. But there was no evidence before the Harappan Valley civilization. It was only in 1929 and 1930, to be specific, that the Harappan excavations were brought into picture, were brought into light. But even then, we could not understand the origin. The reason was this: the excavation nowhere spoke about any aspect or any symbol of Veda. Now, there is only one seal. When I say seal, what does a seal mean? Is there is a rock. There is a small rock which has certain symbolic carvings over it, which is called as the Pashupati seal. Now, this Pashupati seal is the only stone in the entire area of the Harappan civilization which shows one person who is sitting in a posture of yoga. And this is where we get our evidence that there is some relation between the older aspects of our existing civilization, the Vedic civilization, and the Harappan Valley civilization. But now there are a lot of other facts and other aspects as well which have come into picture, which have actually come into light now. Just recently, the biggest evidence which now challenges this Aryan invasion theory, which later on also the historians had to speak as Aryan invasion theory, as Aryan, not just invasion theory, but a migration theory, is this, that the most difficult thing that came up here was, usually what happens is, in studying population science, it is very easier to study population science at places which are colder. The reason is that if I take up, there are excavations and then there are corpses or dead bodies, which are like, for example, bones which are already there, and these are ancient bones of our ancestors. Now, if I take a sample of any of these bones and if I study genetically, then I'm able to understand exactly genetically, population wise or historically, ancestry wise, where is this person fitting into the history of this nation. Unfortunately, with a country like India being a humid country, the problem here arises is that there is no DNA or genetic material that is present intact. Fortunately, some time back, few years back, with very heavy efforts of two different institutes, one is Harvard Medical Science College and another one from Pune, the two science who conducted this study, there was one woman who was somewhere, I think so, 55-year-old, identified as 55-year-old woman, 7,500 years back in the Harappan Valley civilization, which is the Rakhegadi part of the Harappan Valley civilization, which currently is a part of India itself. We could identify, we could extract this DNA, and what we realized extracting this DNA is that 90% of the genetic material of the current Indians has its base in the Harappan Valley civilization. But none of the Eurasian countries, Russia, Asia, European, none of the Eurasian countries, we can find this genetic material that is existing. Which means that rather than any migration that has come up from outside to this country, there is no evidence, one, scientifically genetic evidence, which says that any form of migration or any form of invasion or mixing of genetic pool has happened from outside to the inside or the interiors of this nation. Rather, there is an opposite view which has started coming into picture, a genetic evidence that has started arising. There are certain 11 samples which were tested. Some 300 plus samples were tested some time back. Now there were 11 standards in the study of this genetics, there is something called as outliers. I won't get into the details of this. It is not needed. But there were some 11 dead bodies which were studied. These are ancient, thousands and thousands of years back dead bodies, which could not be identified. These were from Iran, which could not be identified to or associated or related to any other genetic material from any other part of Russia or Eurasia or Europe. When this woman's DNA was taken, it was seen that a larger proportion of these 11 bodies were actually matching to this woman's DNA rather than vice versa. So this is where they came to this conclusion that a lot of migration has actually happened from the Harappan Valley civilization to the Iranian culture and not the otherwise. So this is where we have started gaining a lot of evidence. Now there is a lot of study that is also happening around this. And we know that this is scientifically I'm talking about. Now we know that migration actually never happened from outside to inside. It rather happened from inside to outside. So there is another second school of thought which always existed, and its base had in the very literature of this country itself, not just the Rigveda, but something which we call as Puranas. Puranas clearly state, a lot of texts in the Purana clearly tell us that the Aryan race was originated in the land of India. Now, this is very interesting to understand. Now, there is a fourth aspect to the scientific evidence that we see here. We have already seen archaeological evidence. We have seen linguistic evidence, which is taken into picture. We have seen genetic evidence, which is taken into picture. There is a fourth evidence, which is also a very important evidence, is the astrological evidence that has to be taken into consideration. For example, Orion is a book which was written by Lokmanya Tilak. There he specifically mentions that now there is a position of the planets and the position of the stars which have been mentioned in a lot of our literature, be it Puran, or be it Vedas. A lot of it has been mentioned. Now the position of the stars that has been mentioned in any of our literature, it refers to a position years back which exactly matches to the position of the North Pole. And that is why Lokmanya Tilak in his book speaks about that probably the Aryans originated from the North Pole. But there is also one more scientific aspect to it. We are talking about an era which is thousands and thousands years before. Astrology, rather the latest study of the planets and the solar system and the stars, they say this very clearly, precisely they speak about this, that in thousands or millennials, when we talk, the axis of the earth shifts. So there was a time when the axis of the earth was exactly as at a place where the nakshatra and the position of the stars were historically was at a place which is currently at the North Pole. So because of the shift of the axis, whatever nakshatras were considered were measured at that time, today they are at the North Pole. So that does not mean that the Aryans existed or the Aryans originated from the North Pole itself. So there are a lot of certain evidences which very clearly state that the origin of, you call it Aryan civilization, you call it any other form of civilization, but when I say the origin of the literature or the knowledge of the Veda has come out of the land of this country itself, and there is enough evidence that we have for this. And this is pretty much a very good starting point for even the latest scientists to take this few things ahead. And this is where first ever time in the history of this land, something called as the Vedas came into light, or the Vedas came into picture. A place where we call as the Sapta Sindhu, or the 7 rivers. Is the next slide visible?
Not yet. We are on the 4th slide now.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes. So when we talk about the Vedas, we know culturally, we know historically that the Vedas originated on the land of this country, that is Bharat itself. We have learned, we have heard a lot about Vedas. We know that the entire origin of the cultural aspect or the spiritual aspect or the religious aspect, whatever we call ourselves as Hindus, or we are atheists, but culturally at least we have originated out of the Vedas. But when we contemplate about what exactly Vedas are, there is a lot of confusion about what Veda really is, because there is so much amount of literature. Just let me give you this very fact that there are more than 150,000 books which belong to this entire collection or a group of what we call as the Vedas. So when we talk about Veda, it is very important that we exactly understand what Vedas really are. I'll give you a very small example. We know this, we very simply know that we have been hearing about this quite a lot. Every time ऋग्वेद सुना है हमने, सामवेद सुना है, यजुर्वेद सुना है, अथर्ववेद सुना है. और इसमें कुछ होता है, there is probably some mantra. It is a collection of mantra which is usually recited or it is used in different puja. So what usually happens is, today, if I want to conduct a puja at my home, at my house, what I do is I go and I called a Guruji, a Panditji, who has learned some Veda, some mantra, some shloka, which are out of the Vedas. They come to us, they conduct this puja, and they go back. And what we do is we sit there, we listen to it. When the puja is happening, we listen to it and we feel that yes, there is some amount of positive or good experience that is happening around, and the entire area, the aura of that area has changed, etc. And this is exactly where the story is ended. Probably 6 months or 1 year down the line, there is another puja that we keep at our home. But what is it that is exactly happening out here? This is the missing link that we need to really understand. And how is it connected to this entire aspect of what we call as the Indian knowledge system or Indian spiritual system as such? So certainly there are 4 Vedas which exist: Rigveda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda. The Vedic age, thousands and thousands of years back, no one can exactly tell how much years back the age of Veda existed. But one consensus that all the scientists have really reached out here is there was some age which is also called as the golden age of this country, which has been scientifically called as the Vedic age. The reason why this is called as the Vedic age is that 80 to 90% of the population which existed there followed the culture and the practices of Veda, which means that there was a group of people who were teaching, and there was a group who were learning, and there was a group who were practicing Veda all around. And what were these Vedas? Rigveda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda, of which Rigveda is considered to be the oldest Veda of all the 4 Vedas. Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda are slightly at a later stage. That is why we call it as the earlier Vedic age, and then there is something called as the later Vedic age. So when we talk about the Vedas, what exactly Vedas really are, what we really hear about is one simple aspect of the Veda. Just okay. Is it okay if I keep my video off, because I think there's some bandwidth issue that I'm facing here, so it would be easy for me.
Yes,
Yeah.
sure.
Yes. So whenever a Guruji or Bhajji comes to my house and he recites some mantra and he moves away, what we consider is that yes, certainly these mantras have come out of one or the other Vedas itself. Certainly it has come, either a Rig Ved or Yajur Ved or Samaved. But when we talk about Ved, it is not only the mantra aspect of it. Ved has a very, it has a profound and deeper insight to it. Now, when we talk about Veda, the origin of Veda, it is said to be thousands and thousands years back. There were certain rishis. Now, some say that these were Sapta rishis, the 7 rishis, which are also mentioned in the Vedas, because Vedas are a very organized literature. Probably no other literature at that time existed in the history of this world as organized as these Vedas were and are, to be very precise. So there were certain rishis who say that they did not write it, they did not sit somewhere and they write these Vedas. That did not happen. Rather, it is said that they heard these mantras in their meditations or in their highest form of awareness. So that is the reason why our entire Vedic literature is actually divided into two aspects. One is called as the Shruti and one is called as the Smriti. What we hear as the mantras is actually the Shruti, which is something, Shruti means something which is heard, and Smriti means something which is memorized. The entire collection of the mantra that is there, I'll give you a small example of Rigveda, so we will exactly know how these Vedas are really divided and what are the scientific aspects of these Vedas as well. How Veda is a method of yoga itself. We will also see this slowly in the coming time itself. But Samhita is a portion of the Veda which is a collection of hymns, which is a grand collection of these mantras, and it is called as Samhita, which is a small part of the Vedas. Now there is another part of the Veda which is called as the Brahmanam. This should not be confused with Brahman. Brahmanam is a collection of books. Now what is Brahmanam is that if you conduct any process, there is something called a standard operating procedure. If you see, there is step 1, step 2, step 3 written out there. Now Brahmanam is a collection of books which exactly tells us if you want to conduct a Vedic yajna or a Vedic ritual, because the Karma Kand, the entire Veda is actually divided into 3 aspects: the Karma Kand, the Upasana Kand, and the Jnana Kand. So most importantly, which is the Karma Kand, the process that has to be performed. For example, any Guruji or Bhajji that comes to your house and he performs a ritual, those rituals have come out of some or the other Brahmanam, or this is a standard operating procedure, or simply putting, this is the manual of the Vedas. But years and years together, when these rituals were actually being practiced in the form of yajna as a manual through Brahmanam, there were certain rishis and certain priests which were contemplating that what exactly is the meaning of whatever we are doing. Because probably what we are doing is something very superficial. They wanted to know something which is very insightful or very deep, which has certain deeper aspects. So this is exactly where some rishis, they started writing the essence or the knowledge of the Vedas, which is the summary. It is not just the summary, but exactly apart from the rituals or what exactly comes out of the rituals was written into a book called as the Aranyak. And from Aranyak, the essence of the complete knowledge system of the Vedas come out, which is called as the Upanishad. Now, Upanishad is said to be the final goal or the final end point of the entire exercise of the Veda. So the entire process moved from Samhita to Brahmanam to Aranyak to Upanishad. And this is where the idea of Jnana Yoga, which is also propounded in Bhagavad Gita, comes into picture. Upanishad, or the practice or the method of the Veda, is the method of Jnana Yoga itself. If you study Upanishads, we will realize whatever we have been studying about in yoga, the methods of yoga, the entire knowledge aspect of it comes out of these Upanishads. There are 108 Upanishads which have been written. There are a lot of details which I really won't be able to go in this today's session as such, but there is just one essence I would like to tell, that there are certain 20 Upanishads which are called as, which are the Yoga Upanishads, apart from the 13 Mukhya Upanishads, which were the Yoga Upanishads were little written later in the ages than the Mukhya Upanishads, are part of the Upanishads itself. That is why, that is precisely the reason why yoga as a branch, yoga as a science, is actually a branch of the of Vedas itself. It is knowledge which has come out of Upanishads. How? A small example I would like to give here. The practice of yoga is not complete without the understanding of the Panchamahabhut. The practice of yoga is not complete without the understanding of Ida, Pingala, Sushumna Nadis, or the 72,000 Nadis that run within us. It is not complete without the understanding of the chakra. The practice of yoga is also not complete without understanding the Panchakosh, the 5 koshas that we have. First ever time, the knowledge of all these aspects of yoga, it was later on organized into practice of yoga. But the knowledge of the system of yoga was derived from the Upanishads itself. So there are a lot of Upanishads like Katha Upanishad, Kena Upanishad, etc., which clearly, very clearly mention about different aspects of this spiritual, the yogic spiritual system, like the Nadi or the Pancha Mahabhut, and specifically the Panchakosha, which is the most important part of our practice in any form of yoga. So when we talk about Veda, the study of Veda, there was always, and even today, now this has little got diluted, even today there is an organized way in which the Vedas were always taught. For at least 5,000 plus years, the knowledge of the Veda was transferred mouth to mouth. There was no written aspect available because there was no Sanskrit. This is something very interesting. When we talk about Sanskrit, we say that this comes out of, when we write Sanskrit, it belongs to the Devanagari script. But Devanagari script is something which has actually come in very later ages. There was no script which was existing, which means that Sanskrit for at least 5,000 years was actually transmitted from mouth to mouth. A very important aspect here is that of all the number of verses or number of hymns that are existing, say for example, Rigveda, I'll give you an example of a simple organization of Rigveda itself. Now a book of Rigveda, this will give a very clear picture of how Vedas really are organized. Now if we talk about Rigveda itself, the entire Rigveda is divided into 10 different books and we call it as mandal. There are total of 10,600 mantras that are there in the Samhita portion of the Rigveda. I'm not talking about the Brahman. There are several Brahman books, there are several Upanishads, and there are several Aranyaks which are associated with the Rigveda shakhas or the recensions. I'm only talking about the Rigveda portion of it. There are 10,600 mantras which are existing. Now these mantras, on an average, 8 to 12, a collection of 8 to 12 such mantras make one sukta. For example, if we study Rigveda, the first sukta that we start with is the Agni Sukta, dedicated to the god of Agni. Now this sukta is again a collection of several different mantras. The Gayatri Mantra that we hear is actually a part of the Rigveda itself. Now there are total 1,028 suktas that are there as a part of the book of Rigveda. We'll be surprised to understand that around 70 to 80% of the verses which are there in the later Vedas, which is the Samved, Yajur Veda or Atharva Veda. Atharva Veda is slightly different. It is actually the content of Atharva Veda is absolutely different from all the 3 other Vedas, because initially the first three Vedas, which is Rigveda, Yajur Veda and Samaved, were considered to be the real Veda. The Atharva Veda is actually added little later to this group of Vedas. 70 to 80% of Samaveda and Yajur Veda is actually the Rigveda. So Rigveda is considered to be the most important Veda of all the Vedas that are there, and Atharva Veda has its own importance. So this is where the organization of the book of Rigveda and similarly the other Vedas really look like. But how are these studied? For a student of Veda, it is very important to understand 6 limbs of the study. That is why this is called as the Vedanga. Now, what are these 6 limbs? One is called as Shiksha. Shiksha is something to do with the sound of Veda, because the study of Ved is incomplete without sound. The effect of Ved is actually the source of the effect of Veda. The spiritual effect of Veda is because of the sound of Veda. There are a lot of things which we can actually discuss, but I don't think we have a lot of time to discuss a lot of aspects out here. Can I take 10 more minutes here to discuss other things? I think we are already 9:15.
Yes, please. Sure.
Thank you. So the 6 limbs of Veda, one is Shiksha, which is also called as phonetics. The Kalpa is actually something called as the organization. The Kalpa is actually something very much similar to Brahmanam. Initially, the Brahmanam did not exist, but there was something called as the Kalpa Sutra. Now, there are 2 forms of Kalpa Sutra. One is the Grihya Sutra and one is the Shrauta Sutra. So any forms of sutras or any forms of methods which falls under the Grihya Sutra is something which has to be performed at home. So any simple Vedic ritual that you do at home falls under the part or a group called as Grihya Sutra. And Shrauta Sutra is something which were initially being organized at a very vast and very huge scale on public platforms. The third important aspect that has to be studied was the Vyakaran or the grammar. Panini is considered to be a great organizer of Vyakaran, Sanskrit Vyakaran or Sanskrit grammar. The issue here was, until certain times in the classical period, there were a lot of words in Sanskrit which actually had multiple meanings. And people who were trying to study Ved, they found it very difficult exactly which meaning should I give to which word. As an example, I'll give you this very common myth which exists with the word Deva. Dev is such a common word in Sanskrit. Now, Dev in Vedas can mean God as well, but Dev in Vedas can also mean bright light. And there are also some other meanings of Deva as well. This is exactly the reason why certain people came up with the idea that we need to come up with something called as Nirukta. Now, Nirukta is called as etymology of Sanskrit words. And here Sanskrit words are given exact meaning to what has to be, what context has to be given in terms of the Vedas itself. The another study that one has to do is, if you want to really study Vedas, is Chanda. Now, Chanda is a very important aspect of Veda. For example, I'll give you very briefly what Chanda really means. Chanda in simple English language is meter. Vedic mantras do not extend in any number of words, any random number of words or any random number of length. But there is a specific method in which these Vedic mantras are specified. For example, if you talk about Gayatri Mantra has 3 pada, and every pad has 8 syllables to it, which adds to 24 syllables, which is a part of the Gayatri Chanda. And similarly, there are several different forms of Chanda that exist. And finally, the most important, without the study of Jyotish, the study of Veda or the practice of the Karma Kand of Veda was considered to be incomplete. The Upasana Kand and the Jnana Kand was still possible, but the Karma Kand of Veda was considered to be incomplete. Why? Because if we study Jyotish, we will realize that this entire year, there are a lot of aspects to it. I'm just explaining the simpler aspect of this. The entire year of the months of the complete year are divided into 2 different groups. One is which is called as the Urdhvagami group of the months and the lower group of the months. Okay. Now, there are certain practices which have to be specifically performed at certain period of the time. Again, there are a lot of details which can be shared in terms of Jyotish, because honestly speaking, if we take up one aspect of this entire arm of or entire limb of the 6 limbs, we can actually write books and books all together over it. What time these rituals were performed, what time was specified to be performed, what time was specified not to be performed, etc. There are a lot of things which have been spoken about this, but I'm just going through very superficial details of what exactly Vedanga looks like. So once a child who was actually who went through the process of Upanayan, the Upanayan is considered to be one of the most important even today for the Hindu community. Upanayan sanskar is considered to be a very important sanskar of all the Shodash sanskar, all the 16 sanskar, which forms the primary sanskar or the primary rituals of the Hindu community. Upanayan sanskar is exactly the place where a child is given Gayatri Mantra for the first time. And this is where the study of Vedas come into place. And once the Upanayan sanskar is done, this is where the child starts learning Shiksha, Kalpa, Vyakaran, Nirukta, Chanda, and Jyotish. And the study continues for years and years together. And whatever I'm talking about is something pertaining to the Karma Kand aspect of it. But if we talk about the overall evolution of the process of the Veda, Rigveda is something which originated in the most ancient times. And the other 3 Vedas came into picture. Then later on came Brahmana and Aranyak. The Upanishads came into picture, the Yoga Upanishad, and the precise method of yoga, which is today practiced all around the world, in India and around the world, came into place. I'll little skip this. So basically, what is the objective of Vedas? The Rigveda very clearly mentions that the objective of the Veda is to attain yoga, kshema, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha by utilizing 3 specific methods: the karma kanda, the upasana kanda, and the jnana kanda. You can attain prosperity, you can attain dharma, you can attain artha, and you can attain kama and kshema through the method of karma, through the method of karma kand. When I say karma kand, this is not purely karma yoga that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Vedic forms of karma or the rituals that are performed, which has its own precise organization. We'll also see in just next 2 to 3 minutes, we'll see the organization of this karma kand. Exactly what is the science behind this karma kand. We'll see this superficially, not in very details. But then comes the upasana kand, which are methods which were given. Like, for example, the most common method is japa and dhyana, by which you could attain yoga and moksha along with the other objectives of Veda. And then Jnana itself is a yoga by which the complete objective, the final objective of any form of spiritual practice, any form of sadhana has to be attained, which is moksha and mukti. This is the objective of Vedas and the 3 methods by which the Vedas attain it. How does it exactly attain? The karma part or the karma ritual, the Vedic ritual, is set to remove the mala. Now this, what we are saying here, is actually a part of our Sankhya Darshan. The entire Vedic literature, when we speak about the 4, apart from the 4 Vedas, there is also something called as the Darshan aspect of it. Now the Darshan specifically mentioned that there are 3 objectives for which any person performs sadhana. One is to remove mala, second is to remove vikshep, which is removing vikshep means removing any form of distraction, and removing any form of avaran, which is a veil. The karma ritual helps in removing mala. The upasana ritual, the upasana method, helps in removing vikshep, whereas the jnana part of the entire Veda helps in removing avaran. So karma plus upasana plus jnana yoga helps in removing mala, vikshep, and avaran, which finally leads us to the knowledge path. Just like Yoga Sutra, we think that the Vedas and its methods actually are considered to be disorganized, but that is not the reality. The objective of the Vedas, which is final emancipation, is actually attained, was always attained. And even any person today, any student who is going through a traditional method of Veda, there are steps through which he or she has to go. The first is tapa, which is austerity, without which a student is not inducted. Dhamma, the study of Vedanga, the study of karma part, which is the yajna part of the Veda. And once the yajna part is considered to be an incomplete or only a partial study of the Vedas. But the final part of Veda is actually the study of the Upanishads, which is the Jnana Yoga part of the Vedas and the Upasana meditation part of the Vedas. So Vedas are primarily belonging to the Jnana Yoga portion of the yogic aspect of the Indian spiritual or the Indian knowledge system. Unfortunately, what is happening today is very few households today, because this has conducting the Shodash Sanskar, the 16 aspects, starting before birth and extending until the death of a person. There was a time in the Vedic age when no person actually could live without performing any of these rituals, the Shodash Sanskar. Unfortunately, today what has happened is we do not realize the importance of this Vedic Sanskar, what exactly the scientific aspect really mean here. So let us understand exactly how does the Vedic ritual really works. Because we think ये क्या हो रहा है, यहाँ पे कुछ यज्ञ है, I'm just feeling good around it when I perform this yajna, but there is a very important scientific aspect involved in it. There are three important aspects without which a yajna, a Vedic karma, cannot be complete. I'm still not talking about the upasana, because this is not the place where I can in detail talk about the upasana kind of Veda or the Upanishad kind of Veda, because there are 108 Upanishads, 13 important Upanishads, and every Upanishad has, if proper justice has to be given, every Upanishad has to be studied in very great details. But if we talk about only the karma kand aspect of it, it has its own relevance, it has its own significance in place. Any yajna that is performed, because none of the Vedic ritual is complete without a yajna. Any yajna which is performed has three aspects to it. One is, a yajna cannot be performed without Agni. Agni honi zaruri hi hoti hai wahan par. A yajna cannot be performed only with Agni, but there has to be mantras which are recited out there. And it is not just Agni and mantra, but there is some karma or ritual part which has to be done. So what happens here is, mantra, karma, and Agni, if you perform these Vedic rituals, it does not create, but it generates a positive mental force which has a positive impact on deeper aspects of our subconscious and unconscious minds. And this is where exactly the science comes into picture of the Vedic ritual or the Shodash Sanskar. That is why we call it as Sanskar. Sanskar is positive impression. And the force that is generated, a lot of research has gone into understanding what Agni really means. The real meaning of Agni is actually will, or Agni is actually also, the god of Agni is also desire. And the force that is generated along with Agni, it leads to real karma or the positive karma. So this is exactly where the sanskar aspect, if anyone is interested, I've been conducting a lot of sessions on Shodash Sanskar, Upanishads, etc. So a lot of details can be discussed there as well. There are separate sessions which I regularly conduct for this. But I'll just give a very brief or superficial understanding of how exactly the science of the yajna really looks like. So when there is Agni, which is the will, which is created, and the force which gives rise to karma, and the mantra portion, it has a very positive mental impact on the deepest portion of our mind. And not just the mind, the 5 koshas that we talk about, the Annamay Kosh, the Pranamay Kosh, Manomay Kosh, the Vijnanamay Kosh, and the Anandamay Kosh. It has effect in all its aspect of the koshas. And this is exactly how, when we keep on performing these yagyas, when we keep on performing these rituals on our own, it's not, I'm not saying that it is not right that someone else performs it for us, but it is more important that there are very simple, for example, there are so many people even today who perform simple ritual like Agnihotra at their house. Agnihotra is a very strong Vedic ritual that has been performed for years and years together. But ultimately, as and when the consciousness or the conscious cycle of this entire aspect of the Vedic ritual is taking us from the, considering the yogic perspective of it, moving our consciousness from the Muladhara chakra to the Sahasrara chakra. Anyone who has actually performed these rituals would realize the rise of consciousness from their Muladhara chakra to their Sahasrara chakra. In the yogic perspective, exactly the same thing is called as the rise of Kundalini. And these experiences, people performing yagnas have actually experienced, have had these experiences in their rituals as well. There are a lot of other things which can be really spoken up, which can be talked about. Say, for example, when we speak about the mantra aspect, there is a very important significance that is given, especially when we study Upanishads. I'll just take last 5 minutes. And Om has very great relevance and very great significance, which can be seen if we study Upanishads. Now, the scientific aspect of Om is actually connected to the rise of consciousness within us. For example, if we chant the word Om, Akar is elevation of consciousness from our Muladhara chakra to Swadhisthana chakra. And it has its own material value. The Ukar is something which is related to creation, because Agni, creation cannot happen without Agni. And Ukar is where the consciousness moves from Agni to Vayu. Makar is exactly where the differentiation of Atma, that is consciousness, and the material starts existing. That is why it is said that once your consciousness starts moving beyond the Agni, the lowermost three chakras, which is the Muladhara chakra, Swadhisthana chakra, and the Manipur chakra, where the Agni, because Muladhara chakra has the Prithvi Tattva, Swadhisthana chakra has the Jala Tattva, and Manipur chakra has the Agni Tattva. So once your consciousness starts moving beyond the Agni Tattva, it is said that you have really started arising in your spiritual practices. So this is where the differentiation starts coming into picture. The Bindu Shakti, which is the part of the Om itself, the Bindu of the Om represents the articulate sound, because Vedas is Shabda Brahma. So Vedas has its own limitation. It cannot go beyond what words can express. That is why Vedas are also called as Shabda Brahma. The part of Brahma which requires Shabda, or which requires articulate sound. This is where Bindu Tattva comes into picture. The Ardha Chandra, which is a part of the Sadashiva Tattva, is actually the Vak, or the thinking principle. And once the consciousness moves beyond the thinking principle, there is no need of word, there is no need of thought that takes place. That is why when we say, even in yoga or any other form of spiritual practice, once your spiritual sadhana has gone to a portion where you don't even need, or you reach to a stage where there is no thought process in place. This is exactly where you have crossed the Ardha Chandra Shakti part of it. And the study of the Vedas exactly helps us out here as well. The elevation of consciousness from our Muladhara chakra towards our Sahasrara chakra. There is a lot of myth that runs around Vedas as well. That is why I thought for quite some time I've been speaking about the Vedas, and exactly how does the Veda really help in our spiritual growth, in our spiritual practices? Does it help or does it not help? Is it a form of yoga? Certainly, Vedas is a part of yoga itself. If we speak about karma, part of it, it is the karma yoga, because karma yoga, the real form of karma yoga, which is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, actually finds its origin in the karma ritual of the Vedas itself. And most importantly, the yogic portion of the Vedas, which is the origin of whatever yoga that we see today, is the Jnana Yoga part of it, which comes out of the entire Vedic literature, which is more than 150,000 books that exist out here. And this is the source of our entire cultural civilization, which probably somewhere we have started losing. There is one very good thing which has happened here is that because the world has taken up yoga, and it is really taking us to the heights of spiritual objective and spiritual attainment. But at the same time, if we really want to spread, sustain, and have the same right kind of culture that we always existed as a Hindu culture or the Bharatiya culture, it is very important that we take yoga and the Vedic culture and the aspects, different methods and aspects of the Vedic culture hand in hand. So I thought this is a very right platform to speak about this. And there are a lot of other aspects. I'm really sorry about this because there are so many details which I actually could not go. I've tried to condense this to as small possible portion as possible. But I think this is something which would be helpful for the audience here. And I think thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Any questions we can certainly take.
Thank you, Umakant sir. Yes, I think we can certainly take some questions if you have any. You can raise your hand, like you can use the reactions icon to raise the hand. We can ask. So I would like to ask a question. We now understood about the depth and also the origin that you were, the references that you gave initially. But like towards the end, you mentioned one question of which I would like to get an answer if possible, is how do Vedas help, or rather I'll put it differently, what do we as people who are probably not able to go into deeper aspect of Vedas or study Vedas in great detail, what do we do to probably reach those higher states of consciousness, and where can we start?
Right. I think this is a very practical and relevant question that you have asked. I certainly understand Vedas is vast, and that is also one of the reasons why if any student who wishes to learn Veda, it is almost next to impossible, because donating 6 to 8 years in learning of Veda becomes very difficult, and especially going through the practices of the Vedangas is even very more difficult. But there is a very simple practice. There are several different simple Vedic practices which we all have been performing, which is a simple practice of doing Gayatri Mantra or Gayatri Upasana, because Gayatri is said to be the mother of Vedas. Practically speaking, any person who does Gayatri Mantra Upasana, he gets all the fruits of the study of the Vedas itself. So this is one of the most important practices that you can certainly do, which is Gayatri Mantra Upasana. Any form of simple meditation which involves simple mantra practices. I'll give you one more simple example for this. There are so many people here who regularly chant Ganesh Atharva Shirsha, Ganpati Atharva Shirsha, or Durga Sukta. We have been practicing Vedas, which means that we are practicing Ved here. There are simple practices of doing Agnihotra. Now, Agnihotra practice is a very simple Vedic practice as such. So similarly, there are simpler Vedic practices which do not require, and practically speaking in today's world, it is very difficult, because initially when we speak about, for example, Shrauta Sutra, now practices in Shrauta Sutra extended for years and years together, and they did not cease. For there are evidences and there are stories where it is said that rishis conducted yajnas for 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, and more than that as well, which is very difficult in today's life, especially when we have our own personal commitments, priorities. There are simple Vedic practices there are simple mantra sadhana. We can certainly perform. That is one part of it. Second part is there are people who already have expertise in Shodash Sanskar. We have somewhere, because all 16 sanskar are really not important now. They have lost its relevance, and also many sanskar have been condensed into different forms of other sanskars as well. So there are at least few sanskar of the Shodash sanskar. If we decide to conduct it at our homes, then that will also help us to revive our Vedic culture as well. And a simple practice will help for our spiritual growth also. Spiritual and social growth, mental growth, and overall intellectual growth as well. Because I haven't actually dwelt into the details of Gayatri Mantra. For example, I wanted to speak about Gayatri Mantra as well. How exactly it helps in activating different channels within us, different nadis within us, different glands within us. So there's a different science that goes there as well. So simple practices which exist in Vedas also can be regularly performed.
We can take one more question from Supriya. Supriya, you raised hand. You can unmute. I have given you permission to unmute.
Okay, fine, thanks. My question, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ajab. My question to Sir is regarding what he said initially. He spoke about Aryans and Dravidians, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And you also said that the original perception that Aryans invaded are basically invaded is wrong, and the origin of Aryans is from the Indian civilization itself, right? So what about the Dravidians? I mean, there is nothing clear about Dravidians.
Yes.
And what I wanted to know, one more thing about Dravidians is that the general perception, at least as far as I think, I thought that as far as my knowledge is concerned, I thought the Dravidians are basically the South Indians. This is what this is my knowledge. I don't know whether it is true or not. And also I want to know whether Dravidians have a literature of their own, and whether Dravidian literature and Vedic literature are the same. Or my question is whether Dravidians are also actually Aryans only. This is what I want to know.
Yes. I think this is a very, this is a very important question that you have asked. So the source of this question is, are Aryans and Dravidians same, or are they really different? So
and whether Dravidian, I think Dravidians also have a literature. They also have a lot of vast literature. Whether it is the same as Vedic literature, that is what I want to know.
Absolutely correct. So there is a portion of the Dravidian literature which is different from the Vedic literature as well. Now, when I say that there is no theory of invasion that has happened, but there is a possibility of migration that has happened for sure.
Migration of
so this is migration of the Aryan civilization, but from where to where is the question. Okay. Now there is certainly, we have to see this in context. There is a portion of the population which is today's Negroid population. Okay. Now this is a fact which has moved to India. Now there are certain skull studies which have been done.
Okay, one thing I want to say about one thing, because actually the origin of Indian continent itself is, according to the science, is that we broke off from the African continent and we moved towards the Asian continent, and that is the reason. And then we dashed against the Asian continent, and that is the reason we have Himalayas in the first place.
Exactly.
So now tell me that. Now what were you saying?
Yes. Now the initial structure of the continent is something which is very similar to what we call as the Jambudvip. In our literature, apart from Bharatvarsh, there is a very common word which we call as Jambudvip. When we do skull studies for the Indian population, a lot of these skulls have actually found origin from the Negroid, which is the African population, and the Australian population. Okay. The problem with this kind of study is that there are very few evidences which are actually available, and whatever evidences which are available, people have been trying to extrapolate it from that evidence to the current reality. There was certainly a population which existed here, which probably might have been called as Dravidian population. Now, there is also one school of thought which exists, which says that actually yoga finds its origin from the Dravidian population and not the Aryan population. Similarly, something which belongs to the Shaiva tradition, which is the Kashmiri Shaiva. A lot of yoga, especially the Hatha yoga practices, actually find its origin in the Shaiva tradition of yoga itself. So Dravidians, it is said that they have their own literature, but there are two evidences which we really have to consider out here. Number one, nowhere in the Dravidian literature, this has been studied, nowhere in the Dravidian literature, it is anywhere mentioned that there was any Aryan invasion which took place, or any migration that has happened. That is one. Secondly, the most common, which is I'm talking about the overlap of the two literatures. The most common Dravidian literature is where we find is the Tamilian literature. Tamil Nadu is the place where we actually find a lot of these literatures as well. But the most common overlap, the largest overlap that we see in this literature is the Vedas itself. It is not the yogic origin or any other literature itself, which itself means that even if Aryan was a separate race than the Dravidian, I'll come to the genetic aspect of it as well. Even if we consider Aryans to be a separate race, there certainly this race existed more or less at the same time where the Dravidian race existed in this country itself. Probably there is a possibility which has not been totally eradicated, that there might have happened Aryan migration. This is one beauty of this culture that has existed for thousands and thousands of years. Now today when we see US, what happens is the Indian, for example, the entire population of the world looks at US as a melting pot. US is a multicultural community. Why? Because they look at US as a great opportunity for education. They look at US as a great opportunity for prosperity. And thousands of years back, during the Vedic and Golden Civilization, India was looked at it as a melting pot. Even if there was any existing cultures, it actually existed, India existed, Bharat existed as an amalgamation or conglomeration of quite a lot of different cultures together. The Arabics, they actually have migrated to India. They studied in Takshashila and they moved out. There are so many other cultures actually who migrated, they have moved out. So there is so much of mixing of the cultures and population that has actually happened here. Now, specifically speaking about the genetic aspect of it. So certainly the Dravidian portion, the South Indian portion has slightly different genetic material than the Aryan. Now, if we speak about the Aryan, the most common genetic material that we see in the northern part is in the Kumar. Now, there is a Kumar, we know it, right? In the Uttar Pradesh area or the North region, there are many people who have Kumar as their surname. The most common Aryan genes exist in this Kumar group of the Indian population. There are others as well, which have been studied, but it seems that considering the skull studies, considering the genetic studies, the genetic composition or the pool of the North Indian population is very different from the South Indian population. That is for sure. But was this a difference in the Dravidian cultures and the Aryan culture is yet not clear. But one thing is for sure, any Aboriginal culture that existed in this country, it was not invaded. Vedas originated either together, be it Aryans, Dravidians together, or there was no separate Aryan and Dravidian culture existing, because there is no evidence that exists. For example, if I say the Puranas don't mention about Dravidians. Similarly, yoga don't speak about Dravidian, but Dravid do not speak about any Aryan invasions that has happened either. So probably this is Arya and Dravid is something which has come up because of some political vested interest And this is where this topic came into picture. For the ancient Bharat, this question actually never existed. Was there a Dravidian Bharat, or was there an Aryan Bharat? And there was a conflict that existed, because there is no literature whatsoever speaks that there was any conflict that happened between any of these two clans, be it Dravidian or be it Aryan. So there is no conclusive remark about this. But this question certainly remains, because there is no conclusive evidence pertaining to the same. This is what the best answer I can actually give to this.
Okay. So thank you very much. Think we could have surely have one more session from Sir if he finds time, and if he is ready, because there were so many things that during the session came up, and we all felt that a little more elaboration would help. For example, the Shodasha Samskar that you also mentioned, and a lot of other things also. So I think this was surely an enriching session, and we were very, very glad to listen to you and to have you share your knowledge with us. So I once again thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending. So we'll see you in the next month now for the next session of Yogaarthi. Thank you.
Thank you.